As an aside, do we not have the best music program ever? So today is Hope for Peace and Justice's 10th anniversary, and as we talked among ourselves on the Hope for Peace and Justice group, we realized that we wanted to honor two people today with our Ambassador of Hope Award. You know, our church began as a refugee place, a sanctuary, an asylum place, if you will. For those of us who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, we know what it's like to not want to stay in the shadows. We know what it's like to be someplace where we're not merely tolerated. We know what it's like to desire and work for and expect full inclusion in community. And so we are committed to this issue of immigration, which is not new and which is not going to go away, because it resonates in our hearts. Also because we are no longer that solely gay and lesbian church that we were when we started, but we are gay and straight together. That's very important to us. And also, we have joined the United Church of Christ to be part of a progressive denomination that has a broad spectrum social justice commitment, of which commitment to immigration is just one of those issues. So as we thought about who we could award this year on our 10th anniversary, these two people came to mind, and I want to ask Jose Antonio Vargas and Judge Jenkins to come forward. And let me begin with Judge Jenkins. Judge, we so appreciate your leadership on this issue. When the need arose, you didn't call out the National Guard. You called to us to open our hearts to welcome children, and that's leadership. And we know that you didn't do it to increase your popularity in the voting booth. You did it from conscience, and we admire that, and we appreciate it. And we want to acknowledge today your leadership as the best kind of leadership with our 2014 Ambassador of Justice for Judge Clay Jenkins, in recognition of your compassionate leadership and courage.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome to say something if you like.
I'll say something very briefly. Leaders can evoke compassion and reason, or they can incite fear and anger, but it's the community that decides what the response will be. And this community overwhelmingly chose compassion. We made the national announcement about the temporary shelters that there wouldn't be a need for more temporary shelters because the White House recognized, and I agree, that you shone brighter than any other place in America at a time when our country was looking at children and seeing faceless immigrants and security concerns. You saw children for what they are. Children, just like your children and my children, made in the image of God, a God that is bigger than borders. And you reached out your heart, not to say that we'll take these children in if no one else will, but to say that we value children and we value all people. And it is our honor to help these children and to give these children what all children need, which is love and reassurance and a sense of place. And so I'm filled with gratitude towards you for what you have done, because it's not one person asking people to answer the call, it's thousands of people answering that call. God bless you.
And we wanted to give a national award to Jose Antonio Vargas for your leadership in so many ways. He said last night at the screening of Documented, his CNN documentary that he directed, that he's not a leader, and with respect, you have led many people to a more open heart, a wider embrace, and to a greater place of personal and social freedom through your writing and through your speaking, for your telling your story, and for making sure that so many other kinds of stories, other people's stories, are told too. And that's leadership. Your story, inspiring other stories, and then creating the space for those stories to change the world. So we want to honor you today with our Ambassador of Justice Award for bravely sharing your story and courageously speaking truth to power. We are so grateful to you. And we have a little Bible quote on here from the book of Leviticus. Not normally my favorite book, but it says that it admonishes us to welcome the stranger in our land. So we are so grateful to you, and we want to present this to you.
Thank you.
So we'll pick you up together. Thank you. So now we'll hear from Jose Antonio Vargas. I forgot to introduce him. I'll just say this, journalist, filmmaker, leader. And his story is one that we felt best embodied, hope for peace and justice. We wanted to put it in the sermon time. Not everything is overtly religious, but still can be deeply spiritual. So will you welcome Jose Antonio Vargas on his first sermon.
There's a first for everything. I've never done this before, so I am honored, and I thank you for your invitation to join you in worship this morning at this Cathedral of Hope, and for welcoming Define American, an organization that I help run, to Dallas this morning. Let me be clear about something. I am not a preacher. I have made my life as a writer, as a journalist, and a filmmaker. But nonetheless, I am thankful to your pastor and to this congregation for this invitation. And I'm thankful for one of the words that's up there, and a word that embodies this great church, which is compassion. On this day, actually, on this exact day, 21 years ago, I arrived in this country, in Mountain View, California, August 3rd, 1993. My mother made the ultimate sacrifice. She decided to put her only son on a plane to give him a better life and to send me here to live with her parents, my grandparents. I arrived with this really thick Filipino accent, feeling excited yet unsure of my surroundings, but enthralled by it. I remember the first time I played flag football, not knowing what it was and running all the way to the other side of where I was supposed to go. I remember this freckled young boy named Chris Brown during homeroom class, my first day in school, and when he asked me, "What's up?" I said, "The sky." I didn't really know any American slang. I remember growing up in the Philippines, you learn to speak English by listening to Whitney Houston and Michael Jackson songs. I didn't realize they were black until I got here. Because in the Philippines, we just called them Americans. It wasn't until I came to America that I realized that you had black and white. And then you kind of start wondering, well, where do you fit in if your name is Latino and you look Asian? And this whole question of, what is an American? Do I qualify as an American? Like, what does that mean? That's the question I started asking 21 years ago when I got to this country. And we live at a time when our nation is in search of its very soul. We thought we knew the soul of our nation when Manifest Destiny led colonists across great oceans to build up new communities. We thought we'd found our soul when slavery was abolished. We thought we found our soul when voting rights to women and minorities were expanded. We thought we found our soul, we knew our soul, when we came to the aid of our allies to end a brutal regime in Germany and Japan. But now, in 2014, our nation wades through the waters of liberty yet again on issues such as LGBT rights and immigration and citizenship. And we are once again in search of our own soul. This search has left us in what seems to be a permanent state of crisis. And at the root of this crisis is an identity crisis. I would imagine I'm not the only person in this room who knows a thing or two about crisis and about identity crisis. I've come out twice in my life. 4 years after arriving in the United States, when I was 16, I realized two things. One, that I was gay. I was dating Karen Jensen, but I had a crush on this other dude. So I'm like, something's going on. And then I realized, after going to the DMV to get a driver's permit, that the green card and the passport that my grandfather had given me were both fake. So for about a year and a half, I was in the closet about two things. And frankly, I had to get out of one of them. And for me at that time, growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, learning about Harvey Milk, it felt easier to come out of the gay one, the gay closet first. When I was 18 years old, sitting in my first period U.S. history class, after watching the documentary on Harvey Milk, raising my hand and saying, I'm gay in front of the whole class, and then running out of the class. And my girlfriend, Patricia, found out during brunch that this had happened. But then it took me 12 years till I was 30 years old to come out of this other closet, this immigration closet. And you are looking at the most privileged, undocumented immigrant in America. While every day people like me are getting arrested and detained for daring to board an airplane on a domestic flight, daring to drive on a freeway, daring to provide for our families, while people are getting arrested and detained and deported, you are looking at me delivering your sermon. If that is not a privilege, I don't know what is. But every single day, under the current Obama administration, about 1,100 people are deported every day, ripping apart families, most of whom, like mine, are what's called mixed status families. So out of about 30 people in my family, cousins, aunts, my grandparents, I'm the only one who's undocumented. Everybody else is an American citizen. There are 17 million mixed status families all across America. Political talking points aside, the overwhelming majority of these deportations, 2 million deportations in 5 years, are those who have committed no crime other than being in the country without what the government recognizes as a proper piece of identification. Now, again, I'm not a preacher, but I know that in such times of moral crisis, we often look to Scripture as a guide. And today's passage, read by Judge Clay Jenkins, is a wonderful place to start. In it, we find the very clear response Jesus is giving to his disciples, who asked in the previous chapter, tell us, Jesus, what will be the sign of your coming at the end of this age? In essence, they are asking the ageless question of, how do we adequately prepare to meet you, Jesus, upon your return? Jesus replies by outlining a series of actions, not just beliefs, but actions. And it strikes me that these are not conditional statements by Jesus. Jesus doesn't say, when I was hungry, you gave me food, but only if I was hungry and not gay. If I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink, but not only if my thirst isn't from crossing an ocean or desert as a refugee. If I needed shelter, you gave me a place to stay, but only if I'm not Asian or African American. No, Jesus in this quote suggests that special attention should be given to those who have been marginalized. In this very passage, we find the root condemnation of our moral crisis in America. and in particular, right here in Texas. Not only are we in an identity crisis and a moral crisis, but we are in a relational crisis. A group of descendants of immigrants, none of whom asked permission of Native Americans to be here, are now charged with the task of determining who will accept as a member of our community, of whom we are going to accept. It's a question of who's in and who's out. And those of us who are students of history know that the second we dare to ask that question, we are in grave trouble. Now, I got myself in a bit of a trouble a couple of weeks ago when I decided to fly to the Rio Grande Valley in McAllen, Texas. I had never been at the Texas border. I didn't realize that when you live, or when you dare to live, in the Texas border, you live in a 42-mile, constitution-free, separate but unequal apartheid America, in which everywhere you turn, at the Starbucks that you go to, at the hotel that you stay, there are Border Patrol agents everywhere. But I was there. Define American was called to be there because of what's happening with the humanitarian crisis and what's happening with the children. I like to think a lot about Ellis Island and the fact that 1 out of 3 of you, your ancestors, came from Ellis Island. I'm not sure people realize that between 1892 and 1955, about 12 million undocumented Europeans, white people, crossed the border called the Atlantic Ocean and landed on Ellis Island. Ellis Island opened on January 1st, 1892. As you know, as I know, engraved on a bronze plaque and mounted inside the lower level of the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty is this: "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." I'm not sure if you knew that the very first immigrant to be processed on Ellis Island on January 2nd was a 15-year-old Irish girl, accompanied by her 2 brothers and no one else, named Annie Moore. An unaccompanied minor from Ireland was the very first immigrant processed in Ellis Island. 12 million people followed through. I couldn't stop but think of Annie Moore and all these unaccompanied Irish, German, British, Scottish young people as I went to a refugee shelter at a church in McAllen. And then when I realized that I was trapped there and dared to get on a domestic flight to go home, I found myself getting arrested and detained at the very same detention center. There are 25 detention centers in the state of Texas, more than any other state in this country. I found myself being detained in the exact same detention center as these young 9, 10, 11 Central American children. And I cannot help but think, how can you look at these eyes, at the eyes of these children, and realize that you cannot send them back? How can you not look at the eyes of these children and realize that you're looking at the very soul of what this country is about? The very soul of who we are as a people, and the values and the principles far outweighing any piece of paper or any law that this country had ever passed. Laws, for example, that for years made segregation legal. Laws that for many years made people, gay people, nothing but second-class citizens in the country that they call their home. Yes, there are laws, but more than that, there is justice. And they are not often the same thing. So again, to remind myself, I am not a preacher, but I have to thank God for allies like Judge Jenkins, who in the face of inevitable political backlash chose to follow his conviction and his faith, to stand on the side of justice and lean into the inevitable arc of liberty. This is the same Judge Jenkins who last week said, "We don't turn our back on children who flee death and chaos." In our minds, Judge Jenkins defines American. and I am more than honored to share the stage with you and to be here with you today. And as you give me this award, my privileged status in this country is you're not deporting me, you're giving me awards. It's a little ironic. This award goes to my grandfather, who dared to spend $4,500, which is a lot for somebody who made $7 an hour as a security guard, to buy me fake papers to get me here. This award is dedicated to my choir teacher, Mrs. Denny. She was the first person I ever told that I didn't have papers when I was at school. She wanted the choir to go to Japan for a spring tour trip. And I said, Mrs. Denny, I can't go. I don't have the right paper. She's like, what are you talking about? We'll get you papers. No, Mrs. Denny, I can't go. When she finally understood what I was talking about, the next day, without asking me, she told the whole class that we were going to go to Hawaii instead. This award is dedicated to a man named Peter Pearl. I spent 5 years working as a reporter for the Washington Post, including as a political reporter. Actually, the first time I spent about a month in Dallas, Fort Worth, was in the 2008 election, covering Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. As an undocumented person driving around your freeway seeing a sheriff everywhere, I was a little, mortified. But Peter Pearl was the first person I told that I was undocumented when I was hired at the Washington Post in 2004. And Peter Pearl, once realizing what I had told him, said to me, "Don't tell anybody else. Just keep going." So whenever I found myself in a really hard situation in which I didn't know if I was doing was right or wrong, legal or illegal, I called Peter Pearl. So this is dedicated to my grandfather, to Mrs. Denny, to Peter Pearl, and to all the Peter Pearls and Jill Dennys all across this country, this state, and this city, and this county, who are answering far more than the calling of what is legal, but answering to the call of what is right and what is just. This is for them. And I have to say, and let me be very clear about this. You're only hearing one story. There's 11 million more, thousands of whom are living and driving and working and struggling and contributing right here in your own neighborhood. And the question for all of us is, what do you want to do with us? More importantly, how do you define American? Thank you so much for this honor, and amen. Thank you.